Mountain Blade Warband. If there's one thing I've been trying to escape and continuously failing to, it's the modding content. Even though I ranked and reviewed all the mods I could countless times, the requests for more mod videos keep coming, so I have no choice. I'm trapped here. Forever. Ever since I did that last ranking, there's been an ongoing streak of complaints that the video wasn't really fair to people's favorite mods, which is true, because by design, ranking mods from number 89 to number 1 was never going to be fair for all the mods. Of course it was never going to make everyone happy, and I'm sorry that I don't share your nostalgia for Prophecy of Pandora or your love of Lord of the Rings. I'm only human. But recently, I've been thinking about if I had to do the ranking all over again, is there a way I could do it in a fairer manner? Ideally in a way that's much easier for me to do, and also in a way that would briefly quench my audience's endless thirst for Warband modding content? Well, I thought of something, and there you go. This is the official Warband mods tier list, which I've made myself and left a link for in the video description, so feel free to check it out and make your own ranking. But for today, we'll be ranking all of the mods again, but through a tier list. So let's break the tier list down. Starting with Hot Mess, these are the either broken or too weird or wacky mods that end up making the Warband gaming experience even worse. This is followed by Mild, mods that work but don't offer much of anything that's really memorable. This is then followed by Alright, which means they're pretty good but not spectacular. In Solid, these are all the really good mods all around, from the size, to the ambition, to the quality, and really the only difference between Solid and Top Picks is that Top Picks are my personal favorite based on my taste, my personal nostalgia. They're basically the mods that if I had to pick a few mods to survive and leave all the others to vanish forever, well, the Top Picks would be these mods. My hope though, by using a tier list instead of doing a ranking, is to not have to put a number on any given mods, which I think will make it fairer. So with all of that, let's get to it. Alright, so starting with 180 euros, I'm gonna put this one in Alright. It's a pretty decent medieval Chinese mod, but there's still a lot of stuff missing, and it kinda gets repetitive, and the spelling isn't that great, so, you know, it's okay. 1257 AD though is definitely going to be a solid. I mean, obviously it's one of the biggest mods there is. If you're looking for a medieval mod, this is probably going to be the one that you'll pick, but it's not one of my personal favorites, but I can totally see how it would be for a lot of people. 12th century I'm going to put in Alright as well. It's a pretty cool Chinese mod similar to 180 euros, although this one extends all the way to the Middle East. But even though the mod advertises itself as like, you know, you get to play as the Mongols, there's actually a lot of restrictions on getting Mongolian troops, so it's kind of counterintuitive, and as a nation mod on its own, it's just not that amazing. 1429, the 100 Years War, is gonna go in Alright as well. It's actually a pretty solid mod when it comes to the 100 Years War, but as far as I know, it was never complete. Some of the quests are broken, and it is in French, so it's not for everybody. 16th century, I'm also going to put in Alright. This is probably one of the biggest mods there is, and because like it's the entire world, and that does make it like very impressive because it covers all of the cultures of the time period, but in terms of gameplay itself, it doesn't actually add anything new to native Warband, nothing much anyway, so you know, it's alright, that's the whole point. 1860s Old America, I'm gonna put in Mild. It's a pretty fun mod, like it's a western and there's definitely a lot of efforts that went into the scenery, but once again we have the same issue, which is that in terms of gameplay there just isn't much there, you know? Then we have 2D Fight but Warband, which is obviously gonna go in Hot Mess. This is the one mod that puts everything in 2D but keeps the world in 3D. I mean, it's really experimental, but there's not much to say about it, it's pretty dumb. And as the first top pick, we have 457 AD. Yep, totally a top picks. As a Roman mod, it's actually pretty solid. As a mod that focuses on the collapse of Rome, it's amazing, and the level of detail, the unique quests, the new items, like, it checks all the marks, and I've fallen in love with this mod the moment I picked it. A Clash of Kings? Also a top pick. This was actually the first Game of Thrones mod I played, and I actually played it before I started reading the books, and I still got hooked. The world is beautiful, all the unique quests, all the unique explorations. As a solo adventurer, it's a very amazing mod to play, and I've just enjoyed it thoroughly. I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan, so, you know, that's just how it is. A New Dawn, it's gonna go in Alright. Pretty much all of the mods that enhance just the native experience is probably gonna end up in Alright anyway, and A New Dawn is just one of them. It just adds a whole bunch of features on top of native Calradia. So a lot of people like the mod. For me, meh. A World of Ice and Fire, same as A Clash of Kings. This is another amazing Game of Thrones mod, with the main difference from A Clash of Kings being that this one is also based on Britain Walda, so it's meant to be a lot more hardcore. So you can go with either, but in terms of Game of Thrones mod, they're both solids, and I still love the series, so obviously it's a top pick. Adventure in the East is going to go in solid. This is actually a really solid mod, which is basically like 457 AD, but focuses more on the Middle East, obviously. It's also story driven, although the story is more about keeping you busy than actually giving you something that's really engaging, if I'm being honest. But the setting is obviously very well made. It's a huge mod, it's very solid, so yeah, definite recommend. Age of Sword and Sorcery? I think I'm gonna put it in alright. It's actually a pretty fun mod when it comes to the setting itself. The time period it depicts is pretty solid. It's also got a lot of magic, it's got some dungeons to explore, but in my experience it was also pretty buggy as hell, like especially the sieges. Maybe if I tried it with the script enhancer it would probably be a lot better. So it's a pretty good mod, but I wouldn't go with solid. It still needs a few things more for that. American Civil War Revived, though, definitely solid. In terms of like Civil War mods, it's absolutely stunning, the gun formations work really well, the sound effects are absolutely gruesome and memorable, and it's still in active development, so they've been adding more scenery, more features, so it's really a solid mod all around. I don't have much to say about it. Out Caesar on the Hill, definitely a top pick, best Roman mod ever, so many layers of detail, intense level of kingdom management, Britain Walda mechanics, it's got it all. I mean, it could easily be an entire game on its own. Banner page? I'll make a concession here and put it in solid. I did say that like most native plus mods will end up in alright because of how they basically enhance native, but they don't really do anything besides that, but Banner page, to its credit, has like a lot of different layers that do make it a really solid experience. Like, if you didn't want to play a mod that takes you to a different place, Banner Page is like an entirely new expansion for native, and as such, I do think it deserves to be in the solid rank, even if other similar mods probably won't make it in that rank. Bellum and Parry? I'm gonna put it in solid. In terms of gameplay mechanics, I don't recall them being all that impressive, but it did recreate the entire world of the Roman Empire faithfully. It's a massive map, it's got it all, it checks all the marks. So basically, if you thought Out Caesar on the Hill was too intense, you could essentially have a similar experience playing Bellum and Parry, so it's a pretty solid mod. Between Empires, absolutely, this is a solid mod. I mean, the entire world of Europe, the scenery, the uniforms, and of course the guns and the artillery, you can't make this stuff up. It looks absolutely amazing. I wouldn't put it in one of my top picks personally, because by design, I just find it to be too difficult at times. A lot of the NPCs will dig trenches, which makes sense, but it also makes battles very difficult, and in a way that kind of takes away from the experience, in my opinion. But you can't deny that in terms of gun mods, it's probably one of the best there is. Blood and Steel is definitely going to go in alright. This is one of the oldest mods there is, and it is essentially a native plus mod, but what I really liked about it is that it just made battles ridiculously intense, over the top, and it's really fun for it. But in terms of everything else, I mean, it's still native Warband, so pretty fun to play, but not actually that ambitious. Bones of Ragnvald, top picks. Especially when it comes to story-driven mods, this is probably the mod that has the most complex story that can really keep you engaged for a time, and on top of that, of course, it's a massive world with fantasy elements, all the cool stuff you would expect from a solid total conversion, so Bones of Ragnvald, definitely in my top picks. Breaking Bad though, definitely a hot mess. This mod mostly feels like a joke, there's really not a whole lot to say. Basically native Calradia, but you can buy meth and distribute it. That's literally it. It's a pretty funny mod, but you know, not much else to say. When it comes to Calradgar, I think ultimately it's going to end up in alright. It's basically another native enhanced mod, with the main noticeable feature being the Calradgar storyline, which is the idea that as the main character, your main mission is to find all the gems to make the Calradgar crown, which makes you the Emperor of Calradia, at which point all the other factions will declare war on you. So it definitely makes for an interesting way to play the native campaign, but that's really all it does. There's no noticeable extra features on top of that. Calradia 1417 is also going to end up in alright. Basically native Calradia, but in the late Middle Ages, and as such, the armors and weapons are improved, I guess. There's also lots of Easter eggs, which makes it pretty cool, but, you know, it's still native Calradia just 200 years later. Then there's Calradia Borderlands, which, if it was me personally, I would probably end up putting it in mild, but in terms of quality, it's probably just gonna go in alright as well. Basically just another native enhanced mod, but what this one does is just massively increase the size of the world map, which isn't my thing, but it does introduce new cultures, and with their weapons and armors and new factions and everything, so in terms of the effort being put into it, it's pretty solid, but that's really not my thing personally. I am tired of playing in native Calradia, as I've told many times by now. Chronicles of Might and Magic is definitely a solid mod. It's based on Heroes of Might and Magic, which I hear a lot of people enjoy. In terms of total conversions, it's really solid. As far as I can tell, it follows the original games very faithfully. There's lots of variety in the non-human species, as well as spells. So, very solid mod all around. Crusaders and Jihads is also gonna go in solid. It's just one of those really good Crusade mods. This one is a story campaign, which is pretty cool as well. Could be a little laggy, but otherwise it's very solid. CSGO but Warband, definitely a hot mess. I mean, I don't have much to say about that one. The last update actually made it worse than it was before. You're better off just playing regular CSGO. Then we have Deeds of Arms and Chivalry, which is basically 1429 updated, so it works a lot better. Like, if you were to choose between 1429 and Deeds of Arms and Chivalry, like, this one is just, like, polished, just better all around, so I'm gonna put it in solid. Like, in terms of quality, it's right up there. It's basically the continuation of 1429, so it deserves that spot. Diplomacy for Let Them Reloaded, another native enhanced mod, it's alright. Dragon Ball Z Vegeta, hot mess. Obviously. Though I gotta say, it was pretty impressive what they managed to pull off with that one, but it was never going to make for an amazing gaming experience. Evlat, I will also put at alright. It's basically the same guy who did Kalrad Gur. In fact, I think Kalrad Gur is the prequel, but Evlat is basically native Warband, but story-driven. It's got an interesting storyline, though it's not that complex or engaging, but it makes for a refreshing experience. Explorer, very experimental, bold, but still a hot mess ultimately. Imagine playing native Warband, but without a world map, so you literally gotta travel everywhere. It gets grindy very quickly, which is exactly what ended up happening with Explorer. 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms is the one solid Asian mod in my opinion. It features several countries including Mongolia and China, and the scenery was actually really solid. The sieges were a little ridiculous, but the battles themselves were a lot of fun. In that sense, the mod was really fun to play, so it was pretty solid. Floris, native enhanced, it's alright. Honestly, like, between all of these native enhanced mods, like, it's really, like, the smallest of differences that's going to make a difference on which you prefer. And now we're at Gegokujo, which is going to be a top pick purely for the nostalgia, I'm being honest, though it is undeniably, in my opinion, a very solid mod. In terms of samurai mods, there's a reason we don't really think of any other. It's because it quickly became the total conversion that everybody goes for, and it's got all the extra features for kingdom management and freelancer, all the good sub mods basically. It's got guns as well. I can't complain about Gegokujo. For what it intended to do, it's perfect. Golden Earth I'm going to put in mild. It was a pretty good idea to make a mod based on the Vikings in the New World, but as it stands, this mod doesn't actually offer much. In terms of new gameplay elements, there's virtually none. The world map is very large, but also very sparse. There's not a whole lot to do. So it's basically Brittenwalda without all the cool features of Brittenwalda, and in a world that doesn't actually offer much to begin with. So yeah, it's pretty mild in my opinion. Grande Armée? Grande Armée is the continuation of L'Aigle, which we have yet to get to. I'm going to put this one in solid. I mean, in terms of like Napoleonic War mods, it's right up there, though it was based off L'Aigle, but it's got the uniforms, it's got the muskets. If you enjoy musket mods, Grande Armée is definitely gonna be one you should try. Hispania 1200 I'm gonna put in alright. This mod is medieval mods based mostly in Spain and Portugal, and it is massive, the music is great, the items are cool, but in terms of kingdom management or new layers of gameplay, there wasn't any that I found to be really memorable, so that's why it's alright. Honor and Glory is going to go in solid? Yeah, I'll put it in solid. Basically, if you don't want to play with fire and sword, you'll get a very similar experience for free playing Honor and Glory, which takes the exact setting at more or less the exact same time period. And I heard it got an update recently, so I should check it out again. But, you know, late medieval, guns, pikes, so it's a pretty solid mod overall for what it intended to do. In the Name of Jerusalem, also a solid mod. I mean, in terms of Crusades mod, it's right up there with the best of them. It's high quality. I have very little complaints about it. Independence of Chile, though, is going to be mild. Basically a Muscan mod in South America, and it's got all the items, it's got the guns, but virtually nothing else in terms of gameplay elements, so it tended to get redundant fairly quickly. Iskla mod, another native enhanced mod. This one I'm going to also put in alright, I guess. Actually, I'll put it in mild. Like, at that point, it just got so redundant. I'm sorry. The main thing that this one offers is for you to start as a ruler and to create your own troop trees, but that's about it. In terms of native enhanced, I would say I have more fun playing Floris or Banner Page than I do with this one, so here it is. L'Aigle, I'm going to put in alright. It's basically Grande Armée, but unfinished, and the AI is just not that great, so battles tend to unnecessarily drag on for a while. But yeah, like if there's Grande Armée that's already pretty solid, you might as well just stick with that one, so L'Aigle can stay in alright, despite being, visually at least, very high quality. The Last Days of the Third Age, as I've said, I'm not a big fan of Lord of the Rings, but you can't deny that it's very much a solid mod. In terms of Lord of the Rings, it's got the entire world, it's got all the factions, it's got the campaign, it's got all the fantasy species. So, you know, if you like Lord of the Rings, like, this mod's got everything, and it's still in active development, so you can't go wrong with it. Legacy of the Dragon is also going to go in solid. In terms of fantasy mods, it's very good, it's got spells, it's got non-fantasy species, it's got a bit of a story, although it's not centered at all to the mod. So, in terms of fantasy mods, it's right up there with the best of them in my opinion. Light and Darkness, Heroes of Calradia. I actually really liked this mod when I first played it. Now I'm hesitating. I think I'm gonna put it in solid, mainly for the story. Like, it does have like a really solid story that has you interact with all the companions throughout, but the reason I would also put it in alright is because in terms of gameplay changes, it doesn't really offer any, and while the story itself is engaging, the quests themselves can be very grindy, so it's a bit hit and miss, although in terms of story mods, there is no denying that it's one of the most ambitious. Medieval Conquest is basically the same as 1257 AD with a few tweaks, so I'm gonna put it in solid as well. Native New Design also goes in alright. Native New Design, more features in Native Calradia, so again, if it's your thing, you'll enjoy it, but I wouldn't give it a solid spot personally. New World 1521, I would definitely put in alright, considering like the original setting and the beautiful visuals and everything, but it's also very unstable, even with the script enhancer, so unfortunately it's gonna go in mild. Nova Eras though, definitely a top pick. The level of management in Nova Eras is so cool, from the ability to create multiple sources of income by buying enterprise and buying buildings to rent them out, or just the ability to create your own colonies in the new world. And the addition of new factions and a bunch of new lore. Honestly, Nova Eras is one of my personal favorites, one of the first ones I ever played. So yeah, definitely a top pick. Paradigm Worlds could be either solid or a hot mess, depending on how you personally feel about it. But in terms of quality, I have to put it in solid. I mean, it is obviously highly experimental, but in terms of fantasy, it's also one of the wackiest there is. It's just so much fun to play this mod, have no idea what's going on, and still have an absolute blast. It's Warband at its most ridiculous, basically. Paris No, I mean, there is no secret there. For me, it's definitely a top pick, but overall it is still obviously a very solid mod, new world, lots of fantasy elements, still in active development, different fantasy races, unique quests, massive battles. I've praised Paris No so many times, so it's not only a top pick, it pretty much always ranks #1 whenever I do a ranking and it's included, so there you go. Fantasy Calradia is virtually the same as Legacy of the Dragon, with the exception that it still takes place in native Calradia, so I'm gonna put it in alright, if only because it stays in Calradia. Though honestly, it is still a fun mod to play, and if you've never played fantasy mods in Warband, it's usually the mod I recommend to get you started. Prophecy of Pendor. Yes, it is an absolutely solid mod, but not a personal favorite to earn the top picks, so personally I've never enjoyed it because I think it's intentionally too grindy, but you know, opinions and experiences vary widely. I know it's a solid mod, so you know, here it is. I hope you're happy with that. Red Wars, I'm going to put in alright. Red Wars is actually a very fun mod when it comes to the World War I, World War II aesthetic, but it's also incomplete and broken, so I can't put it in solid because of that. Renaissance, I'm going to put in solid simply because in terms of quality, like, you'll never get a literal Italian Renaissance mod better than Renaissance. Revenge of the Berserk, though, definitely a top pick. Still in development, one of the best story-driven mods there is, and the idea of playing as this massive swordsman that's just tearing through endless rows of enemies is just too much fun to resist. Not that great as a sandbox, but as a story with this character, and it actually does a pretty good job of adapting the manga as far as I know. So Revenge of the Berserk, definitely a must try. Rising Sun is also a very solid mod. Basically Gekokujo, but a few hundred years later, during industrialization, and in terms of quality, it's about the same. I wouldn't put it in top picks because I don't have the same nostalgia for it as I do for Gekokujo, but in terms of gun mods, it's really solid, and in terms of Industrial Japan mods, it's perfect, look no further. Rome at War is also a fairly old mod, I think, that hasn't been updated in a while, and in terms of Roman mods, it's probably not the most ambitious, but I would still say it's really solid. In terms of combat, even though I had not played it before I reviewed it, I thought it was just perfect for what it intended to do. So there you go. Rust 13th Century, I would put it solid if it wasn't so ridiculously hardcore. This is one mod that you'll never be able to beat unless you cheat. So, you know, like, I know some people really enjoy a punishing experience, but I think there's having a punishing experience, and there's having, like, a mod that's playable. And I would say Rust 13th Century is so difficult that it's almost impossible to rise in any significant way. It's just too hard. Sins of Faith, another Crusade mod, I think one of the OGs actually when it comes to those, and you could pick either that one or the others when it comes to Crusade mod, is just as solid, I ain't got no complaints. Sayazen was actually a mod I had in my backlog to do my final big ranking, and it would have been solid if morale wasn't so broken. Like, troops in this mod automatically rout the moment they make contact with the enemy, and it just made for the mod to be completely absurd. If it wasn't for that, it would be a totally solid mod, but because there is that issue, it's gonna stay in alright. Skyrim Civil War, this one goes in mild. I mean, it did get the world of Skyrim perfectly, it got all of the items, it brought the music, but it virtually has nothing in terms of gameplay layers, so it's a literally native Calradia, just in Skyrim instead. So I don't have much else to say about it. Snow in the East is going to go in alright. It's basically like Red Wars, but in the real world, in the Eastern Front in World War II, and it's got all the elements, it's got everything you could ask for, it's pretty solid in terms of the aesthetic. The problem is that as a gun mod, it's really broken, especially when it comes to the sieges. This is literally impossible. Sparta is the same as with Rust 13th Century. In terms of Ancient Greece mods, it's got everything you could possibly ask for. The music, the items, even the phalanx formation. Amazing. I can't complain about it. But the mod was also purposefully designed to be ridiculously hardcore. And because of that, you can basically not play the mod without cheating, and even when you cheat, it's pretty difficult. So because of that, it's going to end up in alright. Star Wars Conquest though, definitely solid. I mean, if there's one world you couldn't possibly imagine getting ported to Warband, it's Star Wars, but Star Wars Conquest did it amazingly well. And people keep telling me it got a remastered recently, so I should definitely look into that, but in terms of gun mods and science fiction mods, I mean, it's perfect, like, seriously. Struggle for the Iliac Bay, definitely a solid mod. Unlike Skyrim Civil War, this one is based on Daggerfall, I believe, and is just way better than Skyrim Civil War in every way. The world, the items, the species, like everything is pretty solid, but it also has a lot of extra layers when it comes to kingdom management, when it comes to some mods, and it's got dungeons that are really cool to explore as well. So in terms of mods, it's really solid. If you're a fan of the Elder Scrolls, you will definitely enjoy this mod. Suvarnabhumi Mahayuv, and I'm sorry, I'm definitely butchering it. This one I'm also going to put in solid. This one takes us to Vietnam and Indonesia in the period of exploration by the Spanish conquistadors, and in terms of visuals, it is absolutely a beautiful mod. The mod features guns, it features lots of different weapons, it's got war elephants, which are also pretty cool, all around very solid and doesn't get enough attention. Check this one out. Then we have Sword of Damocles, which is also one of the OG mods, and this one is definitely going in alright. It's basically a total conversion that's kind of half-assed, if I'm being honest. It's got a much bigger world than native Warband, but it still brings those native factions into it, on top of creating new factions. What really makes this mod fun is that everything is upscaled to ridiculous proportions. You can make a crap ton of money in tournaments, and pools of mercenaries and peasants are usually so massive, you can just constantly rebuild your armies with just a few clicks. Because of that, it's a really fun mod to play, but it doesn't add enough for me to consider it solid. Similarly, we have Tainted Paths, and this mod is just confusing as hell. It's got a lot of ambition, it has a massive world, it even has a story campaign, but the features are so confusing on their own that they kind of take away from the gaming experience. So I would normally put it in solid, but because it's confusing, I'm putting it as alright. The Eagle and the Radiant Cross, definitely a hot mess. This is just my personal experience, but all this mod really does is add guns to native Calradia from the first Mountain Blade Warband, and none of the towns or castles ever loaded for me. It's so awkward, honestly. That might just be my experience, but my experience made for a real hot mess, so that's why it's there. Then we have the Reckoning 3rd stage, which I am putting in solid. Despite being fairly unstable, it's the one mod to my knowledge to add tanks that actually work, helicopters that actually work, and it's a post-apocalyptic zombie mod on top of it all. So it was just so much fun to play this mod. If it was more stable, it would have definitely been a top pick. Which brings us to Reckoning New Beginning, which is like the sequel to 3rd stage, and this one is just a hot mess, largely because it's incomplete. Guns can't be found anywhere except for the ones you start with. The zombies are so ridiculously overpowered that you can never defeat them without cheating. And there's just not a whole lot to do. The mod is just incomplete, that's the main issue with it. And that leaves us with the Reckoning, which is the original zombie mod, which I'm going to put in alright. Like, it was very ambitious, it did create most of the post-apocalyptic scenery that you later see in the other two mods, and it's introduced interesting game concepts, but as a zombie mod, it's just not that great. It gets very repetitive, the zombies themselves aren't particularly dangerous. It also just feels like a diamond in the rough, like it would need more work and more polishing to really be what it was supposed to be. But it was still a very good effort, no doubt. The Triple Alliance felt a lot like Independence of Chile, so it's going to end up in mild as well, with the main difference there that enemy NPCs were so inaccurate that it basically broke battles altogether. And really that's the main reason I didn't like that mod. Then we have Tuluberia, which I'm going to put in alright. I mean, it does have like an entirely new world, it brings new items, which includes guns, and one of the things that initially really impressed me with it was the fighting animation, but that's a some mod that also exists in other mods that I've discovered since then. So, in terms of total conversions, it's probably one of the most forgettable there is. Toho Gensokyo Warfare though, definitely solid. You would not expect this aesthetic to work so well in Warband, but it does. And the story is really fun and charming, the universe is fascinating. Ever since I played it, I immediately fell in love with it, even though I know nothing about Toho. So pretty solid total conversion for that universe. Definitely check it out if that world interests you. Viking Conquest is definitely solid, though I would not consider it a top pick, surprisingly. I mean, it is solid, but in terms of the upgrade from its original mod, Brittenwalda, buying Viking Conquest as a DLC just isn't worth it in my opinion, especially at full price. And what it does add from Brittenwalda is pretty mild on its own. And it also made a lot of things more complicated than it should be. I go more into it into my exclusive review, so do check it out. So obviously Viking Conquest is really solid, but I don't have any nostalgia for it, so that's why it ends up in solid. So rank it as you will. Violence Basketball but Warband, I'll actually put in alright. Like, of all the wackiest mods I've ever played, Violence Basketball actually works in terms of what it's supposed to do. So whether you're playing soccer or basketball or tennis, it's ridiculous, it's fun, and it doesn't feel broken, despite how absolutely ridiculous it is. So it was pretty funny and stable enough that I actually played it for a bit. Yeah, it's alright in my opinion. Warcraft 3 but Warband, I would probably have to try it again to see how it works now, but when I did, it was just an absolute hot mess. Once again, like, surprisingly high quality, the fact that they were able to bring all the assets from Warcraft 3, as well as the scenery and everything, but the way it was designed is fundamentally broken. Like, the HUD at the bottom is just completely ridiculous. It was extremely buggy, so a lot of things tend to crash at random, there's no story, and the world itself is just not polished at all. So again, it's an interesting experiment, but that's all it really is, unfortunately. An experiment. Warsaw Conquest, definitely solid, of course, not one of my top picks, but in terms of fantasy, based on Warhammer, it's probably one of the most ambitious. It's absolutely amazing. It's got the spells, it's got all the species, it's got all the scenery that is more beautiful than the next. So, of course, Warsaw Conquest is also one of the best mods ever made. Only reason it's not in my top picks is once again because I don't have an emotional attachment to it, but I can definitely believe that a lot of people will. Then there's Warzone Akron, which is a fairly recent mod, but one of my favorites in terms of gun mods. They nailed the mechanics spectacularly. The post-apocalyptic world based on Fallout is also amazing. And you know I'm probably very biased on it too, but they did add me as a companion recently, and that just made me love the mod even more. Obviously I'm biased, but it was already in my top picks, and it did rank fairly high in my massive ranking from a few months ago, which was before the companion. So really, it's just a solid gun mod. It works phenomenally well, highly stable, and that's about it really. I don't have much else to say about it, just check my exclusive review to see what I'm talking about. Then we have Wind of the War, which is also an old mod, and this one I'm going to put in mild. A late medieval / Renaissance mod that takes place over the entirety of Europe, but it was obviously not finished, so I don't have much else to add about it. With Fire and Sword is the paid expansion that is basically the same as Honor and Glory in terms of time period. I didn't actually like it all that much. I felt it didn't really improve a whole lot more from Warband, but it was the DLC that made it possible in Warband to have guns. So, you know, you can't deny that. And there's different stories you can do, so they do keep you engaged, but they're also kind of broken. You have to be careful on how you play them, otherwise it could screw up the whole game. So in terms of quality, I would not say it's so bad that it lands in alright, but in my opinion, it barely deserves to be in solid. I feel like if you take it as a mod, it's very hit and miss. World of Vaznar, top pick. Ever since I started playing it, I just love the world that it created. The mix of time periods works really well. The music, the atmosphere, to be able to play as a vampire, necromancy spells, dungeons to explore. I mean, in terms of fantasy mods, it's not the most ambitious, but it does feel surprisingly well balanced, and everything just flows very well, so it's definitely one of my top picks. And that leaves us with Britannwalda, which I forgot to add, so here it is. And basically, like I said, Britannwalda is just the predecessor to Viking Conquest, and this is where all my nostalgia is, so it's definitely going in top picks. It is a very hardcore mod, but unlike Sparta, for example, it does give you the options to reduce the difficulty considerably, at which point the mod becomes very enjoyable. It also has some of the best siege mechanics that I've enjoyed of all Warband mods to this day. The map itself is so condensed with so many factions and bandits that the campaign is actually a lot of fun, so Britannwalda has always been one of my top picks, pretty much always close to Paris now. And that's about it for today. No big outro this time, this was pretty straightforward, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember, the tier list is in the description, so feel free to use it for your own amusement. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.